right, everybody. So today we have back on the podcast, Chris Barakat. How you doing, man?
Doing well, man. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. Recovering from the ice while you're down there in warm Tampa. So a little jealous.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you were just telling me you're at University of Tampa sometimes, and you have the Human Performance Lab. So
Yeah.
I'm curious, what kind of stuff are you doing in the lab? I mean, obviously we've talked about it a little bit, but
Yeah. So I've been there since 2016 now. Started off as a grad student, and then immediately after graduating, I've been working there part-time as an adjunct, but kind of full-time as a researcher, depending on how interested I am in something. But
Mhm.
we study exercise science for the most part, man. Everything pretty darn closely related to bodybuilding. Um, Population of subjects is typically college student males with 3 years 4 years of resistance training experience, so they're not like a someone who's
Right.
been competitively bodybuilding for 10 years per se, but we've had some competitors as our subjects in the randomized control trials. And then more recently I've been doing a decent amount of research on like peak week related stuff. So one was a review, one's an observational study that's under review right now. And then I did a case study on my peak week process this year, which was really cool to collect like objective data on. And I'm looking forward to putting that out there.
Nice, man.
Yeah.
Do you guys do VO2 max testing there?
Yeah, we do. We
Okay.
do.
Because it's actually pretty weird. The last time you and I spoke, I didn't realize it was over a year ago. And
Yeah.
I think it was literally like the day after or the day before I had done a VO2 max test. And
Okay.
then when we scheduled this one, it was also right when I had done a VO2 max test, which it's
Oh,
not like a
interesting.
common thing I'm doing. So it just happened to be the case.
Yeah.
I still hate it, still miserable, but
Yeah.
they changed the protocol on me though, because obviously I wanted to compare one year to the next. And last year
Okay.
they did the Bruce protocol, and then this
Okay.
year they did something called a high protocol. So the ramping went up to like 22% grade or something. And I'm like,
Okay.
I feel like I could keep going, but I can't go up this angle. It was just, yeah,
Okay.
it's a miserable test. So
Yeah.
I
I'm not
actually
a,
go ahead.
I don't do much work at all in the cardiovascular setting, so to
Yeah,
speak.
I would imagine not so much, but
Yeah.
it's just it's an interesting thing, and there's from even from a health standpoint, VO2 max does correlate pretty well with like mortality, and that's
Oh
oftentimes looked
yeah.
at like a cardiorespiratory population where maybe there's issues there, but in
Yeah.
general, a higher is better.
For sure.
So I think when I reached out to you a few months ago, you were talking about okay, you got some competitions coming up. How did the season go? Kind of give a little recap
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Season was awesome, man. I took 4 years away from the stage, so it was 2017 2021. My first show of the season, it was a natural show in New York. And I won my weight class, but I didn't win the overall.
Okay.
So I was like 0 for 5 in overalls at that point.
Hmm.
I just kept falling short in these overalls.
What was
Didn't
your
turn.
weight class?
I was a lightweight, so I weighed in at probably 160 pounds that day or so.
Okay. And
And
how heavy was the overall winner?
uh, he was at least the middleweight. He was probably 185 or
Okay.
something.
Yeah.
Just prettier structure, and my conditioning wasn't in
Mm.
where it needed to be. Um, and then I did a NPC show down here for fun. I had zero expectations. I'm like, all right, I could take last place or I could win. It just kind of depends who shows up.
Right.
And I did really well. I won my bodybuilding weight class, which was middleweight there. And I mean, there was only four of us. It wasn't like a stacked class, but it was
Hmm.
cool to beat, three older gentlemen that were enhanced.
Yeah.
And then the classic physique division, I won my height class. So I was in the overalls for both of those. So that was just a fun freaking experience.
Yeah, man.
I collected data the entire peak week with my colleagues down here. And that's a project actually Dr. Scott Stevenson's on and everything like that. So that's going to be a
Okay.
really cool project. And the part of the reason why I did that show was so I could collect data and actually step on stage rather than running like a mock peak week.
Hmm.
It was a real peak week. That was just a fun freaking experience. Fell short in both overalls, and then finally went to Massachusetts first weekend in November. Won my weight class and finally won the overall. So
Wow,
uh,
man.
turned pro in the WNBF, and it was like the best, the best season finale, season hurrah I could have had.
Yeah,
So it's cool.
that's fantastic.
Super cool.
So
Yeah.
what would have expected the NPC weight classes to be higher, but you were saying you were actually a middleweight in the NPC, so I guess it's somehow designated different.
Yeah, the weight classes are different. I don't memorize the NPC stuff off the top of my head. Another thing I will say is they weigh us in the day before in the NPC, and a lot of people do take pretty drastic measures to suck down one weight class.
Right.
I weighed in, with 3/4 of a gallon of water in me and probably 3 meals in me. So I wasn't cutting at all. Just give me 1 second. I hear my dog chewing up something.
Sure.
River, you want to say hi? Say hi to the people.
You got a Labradoodle?
Yeah, golden doodle.
Golden doodle.
What do you eat?
Does he shed?
No, he doesn't.
That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for that no shed. My brother got 2 Labradoodles, but they're definitely more like 3/4 lab, and they definitely shed. So
this boy's the man.
Looks like it. Every Labradoodle I've come across has been a really great dog.
Yeah, they're, man. People are like, oh, did you like, because this is my first dog I've ever had. I never grew up with dogs, so this whole thing's been a whole new experience for me. Yeah. Everyone's like, oh, did you work with a trainer or whatever? I'm like, no, man, I trained them myself, and like he's really well behaved, generally speaking. But he's just easy to train, Yeah. They're too smart. He's 9 months.
Oh wow, see, it's puppy still.
Yeah. He just got neutered. I feel bad, so I'm keeping him around.
Yeah.
No nuts, no problem.
Right, exactly.
But yeah, sorry to get sidetracked.
No, you're fine.
Yeah, I don't memorize the weight classes in the NPC. But again, I weighed in, well fed and with a lot of fluid in me.
Okay, nice.
But yeah, it was fun, man. And I got really good stage photos and stage video from that show. And unfortunately got horrible stage photos and video from my natural shows because
really,
unfortunately their venues and the lighting and the amount of money that goes into a natural show is way lower than
is there any
orgs, unfortunately,
like, I don't know, people who are a little bit too in their like tribal camps that give you shit about going to like an NPC show all natural? Yeah. Okay.
Yep. I hear it all the time from people that promote for the orgs or I do. I get shit for it. I'm
is
like,
it
listen,
because they think like, is it more of like a, hey, you're like a traitor kind of a thing, or is it like they think maybe you're doing things that you shouldn't be for that show?
No, not at all. Yeah, they would never. It's like you're getting zero acquisition of like, oh, maybe you're taking stuff. It's just like you're giving an organization money that doesn't drug test and doesn't support. And I'm just like, bodybuilding is bodybuilding. Then the route that you go, that's up to each individual. Like, I'm not trying to stand on some moral high ground. I really don't care. Just don't lie and try to do a natural show if you're taking stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
If you're not taking stuff, you should have the ability to do whatever shows you want. If you want to, from a competitive standpoint, it's almost more exciting. It's like, oh, this isn't a level playing field, so to speak, but let me just see how I can hang and bang kind of thing.
Right.
So, yeah. I mean, I've gotten shit for it, but you gotta do what you want to do as an athlete.
What's your like typical off-season weight?
So I hang out super comfortably just between 172 and 175.
Okay.
And that's like a very lean, like a pretty lean body comp. But I pushed up to 183, 185 before my prep. And my lowest weight this prep was 157, but my best look was like 160. Okay. Yeah, I lost like 26 total pounds. The coolest thing that I can, kind of share with you that you would find pretty interesting was my stage weight from September to November was almost identical, but my look drastically improved. And I had DEXA data showing that I lost like 5 pounds of fat mass while regaining 3 pounds of lean mass at the very end stage.
Is that was because you think you lost some of that? Like, obviously, you didn't gain 3 pounds of new muscle, right? At that time, so you just kind of regained some of that was lost.
Yeah. So real quick story. When I was like 6 weeks out from my first show of the season, I was way behind, and I was like, damn, like this would be a good look for 10 weeks out. And this would be like acceptable at 8 weeks out. But this is like not good for me at 6 weeks out. So I had to go pedal to the metal for a decent amount of time. And I'm assuming that's where I lost some tissue at that point. And then after show one, everyone's like, people I genuinely trust that have been doing this for a while. Like, yeah, you got, 3 to 5 pounds of fat to lose to like really bring in the conditioning. And a lot of people were telling me just lose 3 to 5 more pounds. And in my head, I was like, I know I have like 3 to 5 pounds of fat to lose, but I also don't want to focus on the scale weight, and I just want to focus on the look. So what I ended up doing was I actually added in 500 calories per day on my training days. I got out of the deficit on my training days. Instead of eating like 22 to 2,300 calories, I ramped it right up to 27, 2,800 calories. And I kept my non-training days a really aggressive deficit. So rather than being in a deficit, 5 to 7 plus days per week, depending on when I would refeed, I was only in a deficit maybe 3 days per week because my training frequency wasn't too high. And then on my training days, performance was way better with the extra fuel coming in. I started looking fuller. I regained strength on some lifts, and I just saw my physique change, basically week after week at that point. And then I put up some cool like side by sides of, this was my body weight in September. This was the body composition data that I got from this tool and that tool. And then, 6-7 weeks later, I dexed it again at the same weight. And then here are my stats at this exact look. So
Yeah,
that was really cool to see. And I'm kind of glad that I didn't get too caught up on the scale weight, or I wasn't just like, oh, I'm going to do whatever it takes to lose more body weight. And I really focused on doing whatever I can to improve body composition.
So, and to be clear, so basically, if you had, let's say you had gone back to the start of the cut or started a little earlier, do you think that final look that you achieved and were happy with, do you think that could have just been achieved with a slower, maybe done properly diet? Or do you think there was actually something to the almost over dieting and then recomping that you couldn't have gotten with just slowly dieting?
Yeah, no, I think the final look probably could have been super similar. But there is a massive benefit to getting out of the deficit at the end and eating at maintenance on my training days. So even if I did a slower diet approach, it would have been nice to like reverse into a show. I really think that improved my look. But yeah, if I dieted slower and wasn't as aggressive and just didn't lose the lean mass to start with, then I'm pretty sure the end package would have been very similar. Yeah, I was really happy with my prep overall. Like I said, I did collect data on it, and I'll be publishing that hopefully pretty soon.
Cool.
But yeah, I looked at other natural bodybuilding case studies, and some of the numbers I've seen of people losing lean body mass has been pretty drastic. There's been reports where a competitor has lost 15 pounds of lean mass during a diet, 19 pounds of lean mass during a diet.
Oh my God.
And from my 183 to my 160 on a DEXA, I only lost 3 pounds of lean mass. And again, that might not be muscle mass, right? That can be from other tissue. And then like all of my ultrasound data didn't show any reductions in muscle thickness except my pec. And it wasn't even statistically significant. It was a 0.1 millimeter. It was like from 2.9
That's kind of incredible
millimeters
how much like you didn't lose when you think of, because obviously, as you alluded to, a lot of that lean body mass can be glycogen, can be just food bulk and things like that. And so I would imagine that you reversing out helped with that to some degree, right? I mean, you're obviously eating more. But I still would have expected more than that. So that is very impressive.
Yeah, it was cool to see, because even I kind of may have expected more from that kind of measure, from that kind of scan, and that kind of assessment tool. But when I looked at my training performance, I did a really good job of retaining my numbers. So like the weight I was lifting at 183 pounds I somehow kept basically the same loads even when I was 160 pounds.
Yeah. Wow.
And a part of that was, selecting basically all machines.
Okay. I was going to ask
The
about that. Yeah.
the only time I had a barbell in my hand was when I was doing a conventional deadlift or an RDL. Every single other movement was a machine. So I did
Wow.
no dumbbell pressing. I did no barbell pressing. Yeah, it was pretty
And were
wild.
those new movements at the time when you were 183? Like, did you introduce them before the cut?
No, I introduced them before my diet
Okay.
started. So
Yeah.
that was the same movements I were using at the tail end of my improvement season. I just kept
Okay.
them in. I was
Gotcha.
I was pretty stubborn about not changing stuff.
Hmm.
There's a few machines that I just feel so good on, and like I knew that as I diet and I start losing the ability to stabilize myself and like losing tissue in my upper back and just losing thickness, like I'm going to fit into these machines a bit differently.
Right.
And like I know from past preps that, okay, my pressing strength goes down right away when I stick to
Hmm.
barbells and I stick to dumbbells. But I stuck to a lot of these machines that I'm freaking obsessed with. Like this Nautilus shoulder press machine. I freaking love it.
Yeah.
Converges, love that. Nautilus chest press machine. Like I was just able to keep the loads the same. And something I mentioned in another podcast was even on a day where I had poor performance, I would keep my top set weight the same top set weight it was in my off season. So let's just say I was doing reverse band hack squats, and my goal is to get 6 reps on my top set. But that one day I only hit 4. Like I lost reps. At least I
Hmm.
kept the load the same. So the magnitude of mechanical tension didn't change. It was just the amount of reps I performed that changed. And then I would do a back off set with lighter weight and get in more, effective reps or just more total work, total volume. But I was really stubborn about keeping that top set the same load and not losing strength there.
Even if there
Um,
was, I mean, I would imagine there's some point, or even if you got to like 2 reps, would you say, nope, I'm still just going to keep that load?
yeah, like I would still do that for one set. That almost never happened, fortunately. But I lost reps at certain parts
Hmm.
depending on the day. But yeah, I kept load the same, and then I would just do a little bit more work in that back off.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that worked really well. My volume was lower than it's ever been.
Hmm.
And I think that may have helped preserve muscle mass rather than creating more of a muscle protein breakdown
Yeah.
through your training, by doing so much volume that you don't have the calories and the fuel to even support that synthetic response. Even if you're stimulating it, if you don't have the fuel coming in to support that, is it going to help you retain that tissue? It also kind of changed my mindset on like, you don't have to train as if you're trying to build tissue because you don't have the resources to do so.
Right.
This is year 10 of lifting for you. This is year 10 of competing for me, and 12 years of lifting.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was just a different mindset, and I think it paid off.
Yeah, I think like I've had good success with lower volume cuts. I mean, my most successful cut ever was 2020, and I was doing literally, I don't know how low yours was, but I was literally doing like 6 sets to failure per body part.
Mm-hmm.
And other than back, which was getting like 12, but I mean, literally the start at like 205 and the end at 182, I was lifting almost identical weights. So
Nice. Heck
it
yeah.
worked pretty well. And I do find even for getting like beach lean, if you have that like 1 or 2 weeks to just kind of reverse out, that seems to get like your best look. And I would imagine that's
Yeah.
even more drastic when you're getting like contest lean.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
I wonder with the machine versus free weights, because you're right, like it seems like the larger and more systemic the exercise is, the more it just falls off. And I remember back in college, I would hit like the first time I ever hit 4 or 5. I never for deadlift. I never even did it as a 1 rep max. I just got like 395 for 6, 400 for 6. I just waited until I got there. And every time I'd get like a new PR, I would fall back, like systemically something would happen. And the rest of my leg day was fine. All the machines,
Yeah.
everything else I did, identical strength. But I
Yeah.
remember hit 455. And then it was like the next week I could barely do anything. And there was just this like systemic load.
Yeah.
Um, and then I wonder though what you said with the machines during a cut, if that would make it so like we could acknowledge that perhaps initially, let's say you lose from a barbell bench press where you wouldn't lose from a machine.
Mm-hmm.
perhaps that's not actually due to muscle loss, right? Because the machine was just as strong. But I would wonder if that continued, if you, let's say, just exclusively did barbells, and regardless of what the initial cause of the strength loss was, you are then using less overall workload.
Yeah.
Would that then actually result in more muscle loss, even if it wasn't the initial reason? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a high potential for that again, because if the loading is being decreased, regardless of what the reason is, then your magnitude of mechanical tension that you're being uh, that you're receiving is lower, right? So, yeah, I think there's definitely potential for that to be an issue.
Yeah.
And then another thing that happens is, like, let's use the barbell bench press. As you're losing body fat, depending on what your starting point was, you're almost losing width this way, like from a rib cage standpoint. So like if you're losing fat on your back and you're losing a little bit of fat on your pecs, you're almost going to be moving through a slightly larger range of motion on that bench press. Like your glenohumeral joint can actually travel a little bit more, and you're weakest at that end range. So if you gain like an inch of ROM at the very bottom, that's where you're weakest to get out of anyway. So it's kind of like not a surprise that you are losing strength too, because now the movement actually is a little bit different, even though it's still the barbell bench press. You know, that stuff's a little bit more obvious with how your leverages change while you're squatting. Like you kind of feel that. It's almost like your center of mass is a little bit different. Like if you had a relatively big gut or stomach, and then like you're getting leaner and leaner, like all that just feels a little bit different. But yeah, it happens with all of those movements. And again, it happens with the machines as well. But when you have all that artificial stabilization, your ability to produce force is still a bit better.
Yeah. I suppose if I wanted to play devil's advocate, I could say, well, that's a good thing. You're getting more range of motion. So now you're going to have a better stimulus from those same exercises, right?
Sure.
So
Yeah.
I don't know where the truth lies there, but
yeah. I mean, again, like maybe you cut your ROM just a little bit, and maybe you don't, quote unquote, touch your chest like you used to in your off season, and you keep the load the same.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, I'm not dropping load, but I'm still keeping performance there. There's too many factors that truly come into play.
You can get down a rabbit hole there.
Yeah.
So speaking of like form and everything, I've had Kassem on twice recently, and I've seen him kind of doing the rounds for podcasts and everything. And I think I mistakenly thought that you guys did a research study on like the calf study, but I think you just reviewed it. Is that accurate?
Yeah, we just did a research review. The research group was out of Brazil. My buddy Jao was the head author, Jao Nunes.
Okay.
Yeah, really good research group out there.
And essentially what you guys found was that different foot placement resulted in differentiated growth between different heads of the gastroc. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, it was like a classic idea where, okay, let's take what is considered bro science. Let's take what people apply in practice, and let's actually observe it over a 8 to 10 week training protocol, and then measure pre and post, see what's going on. So yeah, they had, the cool thing about this too is actually within subject design. So you can't claim that genetics or nutritional intake impacted their findings. So 1 foot of each subject did a different placement. So some people had this neutral foot where they're doing single leg calf raise this way. 1 foot could have been internally rotated at the hip, so toes pointed in, and then 1 toes pointed out. And what they found was the toes pointed in hit the lateral gastroc more, and then the toes pointed out hit the medial gastroc more. And led to more growth over X amount of weeks, which again, like that's been, touted by the bros in the gym for quite a while. It's cool to see some research that points out you can bias different regions of different muscles. And that's why Kassem loves that, those kinds of findings being published. He's really into trying to optimize what head of what muscle is doing the majority of the work by putting your body in X position by
Yeah, it's
setting
kind of
up this.
amazing they were able to find those differences in such a relatively short period of time. I mean, given how
Yeah.
slow muscle growth is.
Yeah. Again, depending on the subject's population and stuff, but yeah, we see it all the time, man. We see it all the time.
I think something like, so I don't know if you know this about me, but I've done a number of these unilateral experiments. And so
Okay.
I have exclusively trained my right calf for the last like 2 years now. And
Okay.
it's made zero difference at all.
Okay.
My left and right are the same size. And so you could say, like, well, why are you still doing it? I'm like, well, I don't know. Like, I'll at some point I'll be able to say, hey, it's been 10 years, like,
Yeah.
whatever. It's not like it takes more work, right? So that resulted in no difference. For a while, I was working on a one arm pull up and push up goal. And so just on my left side, because my left side is weaker and smaller. So I was like, if I can get it on that side, great. I was doing that for about 3 months with probably about twice the volume. And I did not find a difference in arm size there either. And then I did an experiment where I added 4 sets of leg press to my left leg. And that did result in a difference of about a
Okay.
half an inch after, I don't know, 6 months or something like that.
Yeah.
And what that probably tells me, though, is that my belief is there's a sufficient level of volume. And then after that, it's just kind of junk volume, whatever you want to call it. You're not really getting that much. I think I probably was doing enough upper body volume, hence all of that extra left arm volume didn't add much. I was able to recover from it, but it didn't add much. Whereas I probably was not doing enough lower body. So once I added that extra for the left thigh, that actually did result in increased growth. And calves,
Yeah.
that's just its own thing. So,
Yeah.
so to me, I mean, one, I just find that interesting, but two, I'm almost surprised that it's not more common in studies it's somewhat common, but not, and it's not like every study is like this. But even among individuals, like part of me would even think like, okay, if you're so curious as a population or as a person, what's better, low volume or high volume? You could
Yeah.
just do your own experiment and then just train one side of the body one way, one side the other way, with the two issues being, one, you're going to have to do everything unilateral, and two, obviously over that time period there's a systemic component, like people might argue, the overall recovery from high volume, and that's going to muddy the waters a little bit. But from a purely just like a muscular standpoint, you could try it and then see, especially if it's like your thighs, where it's not like the asymmetry is going to be so apparent to people, or how many people are seeing your thighs. So I don't know,
Yeah.
just a rambling thought there.
Yeah. I don't think a lot of people self-experiment at all.
No.
At least in a fashion to that extent, where they're going to do unilateral
Right.
work and expose themselves to a different stimulus here and a different stimulus there. That within subject design is perfect for a research study, but I just don't think people even want to risk, like, oh, what if I develop more asymmetry
Right.
by doing that? But yeah, it's definitely a cool idea. In every study we do, we always see non-responders too. So I think it's important to at least highlight that. When you look at individuals, you see people that not only don't respond, they might lose muscle during the training phase. And then there's some super high responders.
Yeah.
And again, it's hard to point out exactly why that's occurring. Okay, we don't know exactly what their nutrition's like. We don't know what their sleep is like, their stress is like. So, I don't. Some people argue that. Some people think that there's truly non-responders where no matter what you do to some people, they're just not going to build muscle, and I find that extremely hard to believe.
Yeah, that's something I've talked with Scott Stevenson about before. And he, I think when you look at most of the non-responder or examples where there's non-responders, it tends to be like an older population. And also they're not, usually from what I've seen, it's a training study. They don't have nutrition. And I'm like, you're telling me that there's a healthy 15 to 50-year-old male who could train and eat in a surplus and not put on lean body mass at all?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, obviously, hugely varying responses, but zero.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm in the same boat. I mean, at the same time, there's crazy genetic differences, but skeletal muscle. So I feel like there is the stimulus there, will grow to some extent. And then some of it can be like, maybe it's not really measurable. So maybe they grew so little.
Yeah.
That wasn't statistically significant or wasn't really detectable.
Right.
But that doesn't mean they didn't grow at all. Anyway, that's a little side tangent.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think the non-responder topic is very interesting because like, and I think anybody who's at all informed would not have this view, but you do get those people who will promote, even people with like pretty large followings, who say like genetics are irrelevant, it's just about the hard work. Or, Ben Pekulski famously saying in Generation Iron, I could make you a Mr. Olympia, I could make anybody Mr. Olympia. And it's just like, I don't know how you can make a statement like that, but yeah, when you see how, I think, I'm sure it's somewhat of a cultural thing where, hey, anybody can be, a multi-millionaire, anybody can be this. And it's not to put limits on people, but nobody would say that about anybody could be 6'5". Like, you wouldn't say that, which is obviously much less adaptable. Obviously height is, a lot different, but I don't know. I just find people's unwillingness to accept that there are factors out of your control very interesting.
Yeah. I agree. Sometimes it can serve them well. So sometimes being that ignorant and or naive is actually like really, really important for certain athletes, especially if you're young. So sometimes I feel like if you're young and have a ton of self-confidence and self-belief, that's going to serve you really well in your beginning stage.
Yeah.
Rather than being young and skeptical and not naive,
right.
To be honest, right? Because like I see this, I don't want to mention names, but there's some really good natural bodybuilders that had success immediately, aka they were very young. And it's like, don't get me wrong, they are genetically elite. However, because they're somebody who talks about it's just about hard work and
right.
that.
Yes.
They don't really attribute their own genetics to it. But I feel like that mindset is serving them well.
Yeah.
Because they just have insane self-belief where like, they believe they're going to be a 40-year-old bodybuilder that's been doing it for 20 more years than they have. I'm like, that's incredible that you think you can even hang with this guy. Because like objectively speaking, I see that, you kind of like, you won't, like when you actually are up there on stage, but the fact that you actually believe you can is amazing.
Yeah.
And you kind of see that in the MMA space. Like, sometimes it's like just insane amount of self-belief is what like carries some athletes to be insane performers once that octagon is closed. Whereas you can have someone that's like really skilled and really technical, especially like when they're practicing, but then the headlights are on and the lights are shining on them and they're in a big event and they can't perform.
So
are you
an MMA fan?
I am. My brother fought pro many years back in the Atlantic City circuit. My family watched it. I've been watching I practiced martial arts as a kid. I've been watching martial arts my whole life. So
I've become a huge fan of MMA and UFC specifically for the last 4 years. So I don't. Do you know Mike Dolce? Yeah, and he's I know that it's controversial opinions on him, but he's obviously big in the MMA world. I just had him on like 2 weeks ago, and I just spent half the time talking about the fighters because that's
cool.
Yeah, it was cool.
That's cool, man. Yeah, he's killing it from what I've heard. He's definitely killing it.
No, but I actually think that's a very important topic, and it makes it. There was an analogous topic I was thinking of, but it's like I think it was based on. There's a lot of psychology studies on this where, people's belief about intelligence and stereotypes really factor into test performance. And so it's like, for example, there are like some gender differences in terms of like subjects and like, how well they perform on average. But if you were to put that stereotype into their head more, it skews it even further. And so it's like, well, it might be true, but by letting them onto the truth, it makes the problem worse. And you could say that about like IQ research, and I'm sure athletics as well. And so it's like, well, do you tell the person like what's actually true? But I would say like for like a young athlete like that, like I wouldn't, even if it is true, it's going to result in worse outcomes. So I think there is something to be said for that naivety that
Mhm.
has you, waking up in the morning and trying, and you'll still, what do they say? Like, whatever, shoot for the stars and you'll get further, whatever that expression is. But
Yeah, you'll
you'll
land on the
probably,
moon.
yeah. So
Yeah.
you'll probably still get further. So that's why I'm sometimes hesitant, because like we put a message out there, and like I like to find the truth and I like to think scientifically, but
Yeah.
you don't also want to stunt people's potential growth there.
That's a huge thing that that's a huge message, or the messages I share. I try my best to not burst people's bubble, or like kind of
Yeah.
deflate their self-esteem in a sort of way. So like sometimes, let's say I get a DM or a comment from a pretty young kid that's like 18 years old, has been lifting for 6 months. He's like, hey man, how much muscle do you think I could put on this year? I'm like, dude, I have no idea.
Right.
I'm like, all I'll say is some people in their first year gain like 30 really clean pounds, and some people gain like 4.
Mhm.
But if I told you that you could only put on 6 pounds of muscle your first year of lifting, I would be shocked if you gained more than 6 pounds of muscle.
Mhm.
Even though plenty of people put on 20 solid pounds their first year, they go on this heavy bulk, they're lifting. You make progress every single session anyway, because it's
Right.
so novel. So like, I don't like telling people like, hey man, yeah, you could only gain X amount in X amount of time. Because what's the point? Because we
Sure.
don't know what that person can do. And I don't know if you're an outlier on the good side or an outlier on the bad side, or if you're truly average. So for me to just spit out what the averages are, I just feel like it's almost like you're gambling that this person is the average person. And it's
Right.
like, we don't know that. So
Yeah.
I try to expose people to like both extremes, and just let them know, like, focus on the process, not the end destination. And if you give the process your all, like, you'll be the best you can be, but I don't know what that is for you. So you just
Sure.
have to figure it out yourself. I
Yep.
think that's kind of important, and same thing, like me with natural bodybuilding. One thing I'll say about self-belief is, like, when I was younger, I always thought I had the ability to turn pro at some point in natural bodybuilding, but I never thought I would be a good pro.
Mhm.
Like, I just never envisioned it. I mean, all right, let me take you back to show one in 2011. My goal was to not embarrass myself. So it was like to fit in. It wasn't to win. Like, my goal wasn't like, oh, I'm going to win this class. Like, I'm here to beat people. It was like, I want to work my butt off, do the best I can, and then do this competition and like fit in, like not take last place, but I'm not expecting to take first place,
Right.
and I would have been cool with that. And then I ended up winning my divisions. I won my weight class. I won the team class. I'm like, oh wow, like, now you have more self-belief. I'm like, all right, maybe I can be better than I thought. So then kept working hard, I'm like, all right, now I want to compete in the open division. And I feel like, even though I was 21, that's where I was naive and I was ignorant. So from 19 to 21, I was like, oh, I can turn pro when I'm 21. And I
Mhm.
genuinely thought I would turn pro at 21, because I saw other people do it. I saw what pro physiques look like. I'm like, I'm going to do this at 21. 21 came, I fell short. And then 2017 comes around, I'm 25. And I'm like, I'm definitely turning pro. Like,
Mhm.
this is the year. And I had a good amount of self-belief, and still fell short. Another serving of humble pie. But now I finally achieved, pro status, and my previous belief of I would never be a really competitive pro is kind of out the window. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be a competitive pro. I'm going to be the best I can be. So it's interesting to see that once you achieve something, your self-belief can change, your perspective can change. You can continue to build on that.
Yeah.
And I like a really general or a really basic example of that is, like, if you have a student in school that, is used to getting 75s and 80s on a test, and he studies his butt off one day and finally gets to 95, his confidence of like, hey, if I actually study and try, I can probably be a good student. Like, he'll probably adopt that belief, and
Yeah.
then it would serve him well moving forward, right? So yeah, little
Did
side
you
rant.
find that when you were 21 and 25 that you had ever thought maybe I can't go pro? Did that ever happen?
No. in 21 and 25, I was just like, all right, it just depends who shows up. And then I kind of just understood like that's out of your control.
Yeah.
I'm like, the next Kai Green can show up and I'm not going to
Right.
beat the next Kai Green. So
Right.
I kind of just understood that, all right, some people do really small shows. They're not that competitive. You don't know who's coming on stage. And I always tried my best to do the most competitive shows because I always wanted to felt like it was earned,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what about moving forward? I mean, you said you're 12 years into lifting, 10 years of competing. So you started competing quite early.
Yeah.
At this point, what improvements do you think you're able to make, and how would you go about that at an advanced stage?
Yeah. So I'm very happy with the improvements I made from 2017 to 2021. I still think I can make a good amount of improvements. Now, again, I don't know what those numbers might look like, objectively speaking, but if I stepped on stage at 160 this year, I genuinely think I can be very competitive at like 163, 165.
Yeah. And what were you in 2017?
156.
Okay.
So yeah, I put on like 3 to 4 pounds, maybe.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say like 3-ish pounds. Yeah, it was good. Again, but if I told someone, hey, you're going to gain 1 pound per year for 3 years, they'll be like, oh, fuck this. Like, let me go jump on some anabolics, or I'm not going to lift. I'm going to, go watch Netflix. So, yeah, I genuinely think I could put on another 3 to 5 pounds of stage weight. And that'll look, drastically different on someone who's only 5'7" and, yeah.
Even in your off season, I mean, 183, people probably don't think that sounds that big, but 183, not fat, and at 5'7", that's a big guy.
Yeah. Again, I really don't have great genetics, so I don't I don't look great in clothing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even look good if I'm just standing there. Even if I'm contest lean, if I'm just standing there, I don't have a great skeletal frame, so my structure isn't like, oh wow, that's a great physique. I have to be flexing. Like my physique comes alive when I hit a pose.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent a lot of time improving my posing to maximize that illusion. It really is such an illusion. It's crazy, man.
Yeah, I know.
It is so crazy because like just random examples, like there's people in my neighborhood, my neighbors that live across the street, that live right next door to me. They have no idea I compete. I'm like, they've probably seen me walk around the neighborhood walking my dog with my shirt off. But like if they saw a photo, oh, I got a funny story for you. If they saw a photo of me on stage flexing, they'll be like, "That's you!" Like they won't even get it.
Right.
Really quick side story that you probably find funny. When I was traveling back home from Florida from Massachusetts to Florida after I won, I had this big ass trophy with me while I was in the airport. And I have always seen like footage of like the Olympians traveling in the airport and like they're getting asked like, oh, what show do you do? Because nobody even knows what bodybuilding is, right?
Right.
So this lady, while I'm checking in my suitcase, she's like, oh, who's the trophy for? I'm like, oh, the trophy's for me. She's like, what do you mean? I'm like, yeah, I just competed in a bodybuilding show. And, I'm wearing a hoodie, I'm wearing sweatpants.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, that's really interesting. She's like, she like thought I was like taking it to an event or something. And then I showed her a photo of like what I looked like literally the day before on stage. And she was like, whoa, what the heck?
Yeah.
And then I'm going through TSA and the TSA guy made a comment. He was like, do your legs look like the trophy's legs? I'm like, I could show you. So I like dropped my pants and started flexing my quads in the TSA line. And it was hysterical, but nobody would ever assume like when you're a natural bodybuilder, even when you're stage lean, like your physique only really comes alive when you're flexing.
Yeah, no, I definitely
funny, man.
feel that because it's like where I was talking to somebody at the gym and, I usually am not wearing I don't wear like string tees or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I'm like talking to the guy and I'm like, it's often like, oh yeah, let me show you a picture of me, right? Even though I'm standing right in front of you, look at this picture or look in the mirror, look at my abs in the mirror. Don't look straight on, right? So
yeah, it's funny, man. Have you ever been to a natural bodybuilding show?
I've not. No.
All right, you gotta come to one. I'm gonna invite you to one, man. And where do you live right now?
I'm in PA right now.
Okay.
But like I said, I have connections in Tampa, so I'm looking to go.
Okay. Yeah, you got to come to one. I know you've been skeptical of certain people throughout the years, and there definitely are some, some fakes out there, but literally the organization I compete in,
Mhm.
there I haven't ever been at a show and been like, oh, that guy is cheating.
Yeah.
Like I've
You know,
never felt like that.
I don't know if I would put myself in, maybe at one point in my life, but I don't think I would put myself in the camp of really questioning if too many people are natural. Like obviously
Okay.
we have like the classic examples, but like very people who are often questioned, like Lane Norton's often questioned. I believe he's natural. Alberto Nunez is super impressive. I mean, he's not even that big, but
Mm-hmm.
and Jeff Alberts. But I'm trying to think of who else would be like questionable. Like maybe somebody who I'd be like, okay, I don't know about that, would be like that Simeon Panda guy or
Mm-hmm.
Ulysses, people like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there are some crazy impressive naturals. I mean, even if I just look at like some of my friends who blew up so quickly, and then I
Yeah.
think, okay, it's unlikely that you are like top of the top. So somebody's
Sure.
genetics trounce yours and they're
Sure.
natural. So
Yeah.
I'm sure that there's some absolutely insane naturals.
Yeah. One thing I'll say, going back to just like perception, self belief, the first show I ever spectated at was in 2010. And I didn't know natural bodybuilding was a thing. When I thought of bodybuilding, I thought of Flex Magazine, thought of
Mm-hmm.
Jay Cutler and Kai Green. And my buddy, who was a college classmate of mine, was doing a show. So I went to support him. And it was a novice show. It was like the slogan of the show was like, the show first time competitors choose. So it was
Mm-hmm.
known to be a beginner show.
Yeah.
And I went there and I was blown away. I was super impressed
Oh,
with
really?
a lot of the competitors. And I was questioning a lot of the competitors. I'm like, there's no way this guy's natural, this and that. If I saw photos of those same physiques today, I'd be like, oh, these are just like subpar amateurs. Like this is
Really?
not impressive. Yeah. So there was a huge like mental shift. I even used to think like MMA fighters, like way back then, I used to think they were like really muscular and really jacked.
Mm-hmm.
And then like being in the physique realm, it skews your
Oh,
perception.
totally.
Like the body image issues are so strong in when you're in the industry and you're bodybuilding on any side of the sport, the body image issues are so strong. And the
Sure.
reason I know that is because like I can literally look at pictures of people from 2010 and the way I used to perceive them then versus
Mm-hmm.
how I perceive them now is totally different.
Oh, yeah.
Like even
Yeah.
someone like GSP, like I used to think like he, like, don't get me wrong, GSP is a freak athlete, sick
Yeah. Yeah.
physique,
He
but
does
I
have a
used to
pretty good
think he
physique.
was
Yeah.
like insane. And now
Yeah.
you compare them to like the best natural
Of
bodybuilders. You're like,
course.
oh, okay. So
Yeah.
yeah, perception drastically changed.
An example I've given on the podcast before, when I was on the wrestling team in high school, I was like a freshman and all I cared about was abs, right? And there was this guy who I was like, I literally like just couldn't not stare at him. He looked like a Greek god. Like I was like, what the hell is it? It was like just perfection.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that was funny is after the season, and he had gone from like a legit probably 7% to maybe like 12 to 13, and probably had more lean body mass. But I was
Mm-hmm.
so much less impressed because at that age, it's all about leanness and abs and
Mm-hmm.
everything. So that was one interesting thing. But then two, like years later, I looked him up on Facebook and saw high school pictures. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, this guy must have been like 6 foot, I don't know, 160, like,
Okay.
but in my head at that age, it was so
Yep.
impressive. So I would
Yeah.
say my genetics now allow me to be very impressive to my high school self.
That's cool.
But
That's a
never,
win.
yeah, right. It's a win for that. But at 6'1", I call myself beach lean at like 185 to 190. Obviously, I'm not stepping on any stages, but it's
Okay.
like to general population, it's a good look, right? But
Hey.
in our world here, it's
Yeah. That's a win, man. You're impressing your former self and
there you go.
you're better than you previously were, man. So
So,
that's
but
cool.
to finish up on the topic of like for improvements, do you
Yeah.
know you mentioned maybe 3 to 4 pounds? It's obviously hard to predict that, but
Yeah.
do you have a game plan? Is it like, okay, again, the Kassem and biomechanics topics have been a lot. Is it let's find new exercises to stimulate things that I haven't been, or is it just
Hmm.
bread and butter, progressive overload, calorie surplus over
Yeah.
time?
So the biggest change is going to be sticking to a lot of machines and progress, and then keeping the basics the same. So progressively overloading, getting strong as hell on exercises that fit me super well. I did waste a lot of time barbell back squatting, super stubborn, never got super strong at it, didn't even get a great stimulus from it, in regards to my quads and my glutes. Kept doing it over and over and over because everyone's barbell back squatting. Big waste of time. I start hack squatting, start making tremendous quad progress. I can put my socks on the next day without my back killing me. I could get in and out of my car. So yeah, just being smarter with movement selection and progressing on that over time. And then, I mean, the physique, I do feel I have pretty good symmetry. So it's not like, oh, like this body part really needs to come up and this one doesn't. So it's kind of grow everything relatively similarly, but I really want to bring up my pecs, my back.
0.1 millimeters back.
Yeah. No, I really want to bring up my chest. I have really narrow clavicles. So I have no chest sweep really, like very, very narrow. So I just got to get as dense as I can and just keep chipping away, man.
Yeah. The squat example is a good one because I got to the point that I was repping 405 on squat, and
that's epic.
My thighs were big, and this is one of my biggest issues with why I would never step on stage is I'm very long. So I have a 6'4" arm span. My legs, like my brother's almost my height, and if we stand next to each other, my hips are like 3 or 4 inches higher. It's really bad for bodybuilding. But my thighs at one point were 27 inches, but they're never going to look super big. But in terms of exercise selection, it was always like you said, like squats, maybe straight legged deadlifts, or even sumo deadlifts, which from a bodybuilding standpoint might not be the best choice. And I don't know if you wouldn't know this, but I've actually been working with Steve Hall for the last 8 weeks or so, maybe closer to 10 now. And it's really just like an experiment of like, hey, I've done everything under the sun, 17 years now, maybe almost 18. But I've not tried the whole like RP approach of, ramping and coming back and all that. But then two, it's a lot of machines, it's a lot of new exercises, like literally 80+% of the exercises I'm doing right now are new exercises. So it's kind of like hey, if there's anything left in the tank, like let's see, and let's maybe find some of these different movements. And I would say the exercises are almost more enjoyable because it's systemically less taxing, right? I mean, just on the whole. And I'll give into the fact that novelty can be a stimulus, and even if just psychologically, it's just nice to do something different.
That's cool. That's awesome, man.
Yeah. So, if you have time, I have one last question on the.
Yeah. Absolutely. I feel like we've been just shooting the shit. I haven't.
I think it's good.
The listeners with much value, but yeah.
No, I think so because I think people like. Don't get me wrong. I think there's a place for a specific, almost like Q&A format, but I think people like to hear a conversation, and also especially for you, where you have the research side, but you've also competed recently. I think it kind of dives into that. So I was going to ask about peak week because you touched on that. I know Scott Stevenson's done a lot and put out there with peak week, and I imagine there's some differences between enhanced and maybe a natural peak week. But for you, it sounds like yours is more of a time period, not just a peak week. But what do you find for, let's say, a natural competitor would be how you go about a peak week? And just to kind of go back a little bit, when I was first getting into this, it was like there was a lot of different manipulations to be done, right? Between sodium and water and lifting. And then it became popular to say, you don't need to do any of that. You just have to get lean enough. Don't manipulate sodium. Don't manipulate water. Just get lean. And now I'm seeing that change a little bit again. So where are you falling on that now?
Yeah. So if you're very lean, you should look good regardless of what you do. So if you look great in the gym, you should look just as good on stage, assuming you got a good pump backstage and you're well fed and you're decently hydrated. So if you're lean, you should look good for sure. But there is a difference between, being lean and walking around good and then truly peaking. It's one of those things that I feel like it doesn't even get captured in high quality photos. It gets captured in really high quality video and in person. Like there's something you can just see with your eye that does make a difference. And then as the athlete or competitor, it's something that you can feel. So yeah, I'll give you just like a general background on how I approach peak week and some of these subjective feelings that you can look for, and then even some objective measurements you may be able to kind of take. But the outline that the framework that I utilize for peak week is actually suggested in our review paper. So my man, Dr. Guillermo Escalante, is the head author there. And it's Guillermo, it's Scott Stevenson, it's myself, it's Alan Aragon, and Brad on this review paper. So it's a really cool peak week paper. And I use that framework where I depleted carbohydrates for 3 days, where I was just eating fibrous vegetables. I wasn't eating, my starchy rice or my potatoes or my oats. Cut out fruit for a few days, and I was fat loading as well. So there was one day where I ate the last day of carb depletion. I ate like 140 grams of fat.
Wow.
And that is to potentially increase intramuscular triglyceride levels, and that can attribute to a small percentage of total cell volume and fullness. So the first 3 days were a carb depletion with a fat load, and then the goal was to carbohydrate load just Wednesday and Thursday. That's how we outline it in the paper. And I ate around 650 carbs and another 650 carbs on Wednesday and Thursday.
Wow.
And I still wasn't full. So I couldn't follow the framework to the T like I wanted to, because you need to auto-regulate based on how you're responding and what you need. So I continued carb loading all the way through. So I ended up carb loading Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And the way that water was manipulated was water was kept pretty high the entire week, where it's the same as my normal prep, 1.5 gallons. And then as I carb loaded, I increased to 3 gallons. So Wednesday was 3 gallons, Thursday was 3 gallons. And then Friday, I pulled water back down to 1.25 gallons. So even though you're drinking 1.25 gallons of water, you actually do induce a slight dehydration effect by going from 3 to 1. And the cool thing was that I'm really excited to share. This was the first study that objectively measured subcutaneous skin thickness day after day after day after day. And there were certain regions of my physique where my subcutaneous layer significantly decreased, almost by 100% ultrasound.
Okay.
So that was super cool. So like some people use the 7-site ultrasound to measure body fat, or they use skin calipers, right? Like they actually pinch the skin and they take a millimeter measurement that way. We did both. The cool thing is the ultrasound is clearly the most specific, and there's like the least amount of room for error, because you just see it on the screen, you freeze the image, and you clearly measure that subcutaneous layer. Whereas when you're pinching, you're kind of measuring like both sides of the dermis. There's a skill technique.
Right.
The actual tool is just in millimeters, where you kind of have to guesstimate, like, is this a 2, a 2.5, or a 3? Right. Whereas with the ultrasound, it can be like, oh, this is 2.4, this is 2.7. Like it's super specific.
And you were saying the actual skin was thinner?
The subcutaneous fat layer significantly decreased, which is our subcutaneous, what we can pinch. The reason that was so cool is because, like, for example, my tricep and my quads almost decreased by 100%. So just a really quick number, like if it was 5 millimeters, it decreased to 2.5 millimeters.
Wow.
And in those regions, I saw significantly more striation. So like my tricep feathering was way better when I was like peaked, and my quad feathering was better. And like, that's obviously the goal. And like, these are things that don't matter when you're walking around the gym, but when you're trying to step on stage, like all those minor details is what people are trying to achieve. So I was just cool that we were able to collect data and have some objective measurements that are going to demonstrate that.
So just to be clear, that was those changes you're talking about was during the peak week itself.
During the peak week itself, yeah. And
even with those higher calories.
Yeah, so I wasn't losing body fat. This is what's going on. This is at least what I hypothesize. I'm clearly not losing body fat. I was eating like 3,500 calories. No, I was eating like 5,000 calories probably.
Oh, wow.
But what's happening is the adipocyte itself, I was probably losing water within the fat cell.
Mm-hmm.
So the thickness of that subcutaneous layer is decreasing. On top of that, because I'm carbohydrate loading, my muscle is pushing against the skin to a larger extent as the muscle is increasing in fullness.
Yeah.
So it's like this is pushing this end up, and this layer is decreasing in size anyway. So
that's awesome.
From a subjective standpoint, you can feel like a lot of people say like, oh, I feel like my skin is way tighter, or I feel like my muscle is going to burst out of my skin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That is really what you want to feel if you're peaking, you know? And I felt that in certain regions for sure. Like I even felt like my chest was just hanging off of my rib cage more than it usually was. Like it was fuller than ever. Yeah. I felt my lats were just full. Like my skin was tight where it was like almost uncomfortable. And I'm like, okay, I'm fully loaded. I feel freaking fantastic. I'm going to get a nasty pump. This was the Florida show. Okay. I feel like I nailed my peaks every show this year. I was just at different compositions.
Yeah.
The Florida show, the NPC Hurricane Bay in St. Petersburg. Super fun. And then, the lab is in Tampa. So on show day, we went into the lab at like 4:30 a.m. and then I went and competed.
Okay. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, that was cool. Cool. Yeah.
All right, man. Well, as always, great talking to you. I'm sure this will not be the last time we get you on the podcast. Where can people find more of your stuff, more of the cool things you're putting out there?
Yeah, for sure. You guys, I'm most active on Instagram. So it's just my full name there, at Christopher.Barakat for social media. And then you guys can check out my website. It's just schoolofgains.com, and Gains is spelled with a Z. You'll find articles there, videos there, some free resources, some paid resources, programs, books. And I'm just starting my first online course, like a 4-week online course with one of my coaches. So I'm excited about that. And you guys can check out all the information there.
Awesome, man. We'll do part 3 in Tampa.
Sounds good. Yeah. Sounds good, man.